Hi, welcome to Always Andy's Mom, episode 337. Today's episode is sponsored by Jean Upton. And Jean wrote, when I flipped my calendar to this year and realized that February 26th, my son Ben's birthday, is a Thursday, the day the podcasts are received. Last year on his birthday, I sent in a donation, but now that episodes can be sponsored, I would like to sponsor the 26th episode if possible. My son Ben was the total package: loving, kind, smart, funny, artistic, athletic, and oh, the memories I have of him. The memories are wonderful. It's the reminders that hurt. The reminders that he'll never fling his boots off into the closet when he came home, or the reminders of him walking into the house when I was cooking and say how he loved to come home and smell my cooking. And I'm actually not a very good cook, she says. Anyway, you get it. Thanks for helping me through the tough times, Jean, in memory of her son, Ben. Thank you so much for sponsoring today. I'm Gwen Kapcia. I run a business called Your Grief Guide. I had the privilege of walking beside Marcy and Eric after the death of their son, Andy. And we have developed a relationship through the podcast, and some of you have seen me on the live streams. And when the season came up for Marcy to take what I thought it suggested very strongly, a needed break just to breathe and take care of herself and her family, I offered to do the episodes and kind of take an educational twist. So if you have not listened, the first 3 weeks of this, the three prior to this episodes, we have kind of built a pathway to what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully we made people feel normal in their grief, why it's so hard, what the experts say we need in order to heal. And then we looked at some of the big obstacles, big emotions last week, and some suggestions on how to help ourselves through that. So that brings us to today, which I kind of always want to leave that hope for healing, or what does this look like, or how do I manage this in the long haul? Some of you are not here yet. You are not in this spot where you're ready to rebuild. You are still in the survival mode, and we get that. So maybe just make a note to, in your future, a year from now, watch episode 337, or you want to listen and just kind of put the goals out there, but know that it's really far down the road. And some of you have been listening for a while. You're several years in, and you're thinking, I kind of want to look at this. Like, what does this look like for me? How do I blend this all into my life? Now, I think the first thing that I want to talk about is if you've ever found yourself maybe having a good time, like going somewhere and enjoying yourself, and then coming home and realizing that you had gone out and had a good time. Many people to some degree say, there were short periods of the evening where I didn't think about it. At the beginning, as you know, everywhere you go, every moment, you're never not thinking about it. But there may come a time where you go out or you find yourself laughing, and then you feel guilty that you laughed, that you had, some enjoyment for yourself. And you're like, what's wrong with me? How can I be doing this? My person died, and here I am. Some people say it was such a relief to have a change of scenery or do something or enjoy themselves. Most of the time, people do say, when I got home, I cried and cried and cried. So how do I know if I'm getting better? I mean, maybe that's a sign that you can go out and enjoy yourself. If people start saying to you, hey, have you gotten a haircut, or you look different, or maybe complimenting you on how you look, kind of pay attention, because I tell people maybe you are healing, because I can see healing on people's face. They look different when I meet them in the depths of their pain, and I'm kind of in tune, maybe somewhat too much to that, because I forget where I was and I said, oh, they're sad, they've been crying, and the other person said, how did you pick up on that? I said, well, I'm a little sensitive to that. But I can sometimes tell when someone's walking in to meet with me, or the first time they get on the screen, how they're doing. So pay attention if people are complimenting you. Maybe you are beginning to heal. I have I have seen people when I mentioned the family last week. If you go back and listen to when their oldest son died by suicide, and then they had some communication, some family stuff to work through with their surviving 13-year-old son. When I first met that family, someone in my family was shopping with me and saw them, and I talked with them, the bereaved family. And when I got in the car, they said, well, that just ruined my day. And actually, it was Christmas time. And they said, I feel like that ruined my whole Christmas, that your job is so sad, that these people, that's just horrible what they were telling you. And they went on and on and on. And then it was about a year later, that same person was with me, and we ran into the mom and the surviving son again, and we talked, and I was actually moving from the area, and I said, we'll stay in touch. I'm so proud of you. You've done so well. And when they got in the car, that person said, how do you know them? And I'm like, well, what do you mean, how do I know them? They're the people who ruined your Christmas. I mean, it's only like October of the following year. You don't remember? And they said they don't even look the same. And I said, that's because they're beginning to heal, right? So pay attention to that. Now, the part about a major loss is that we often talk about the fog of grief, right? So the loss occurs, and there may be several days, a month or two, that you're just in a complete fog, and the reality hasn't really hit you. Like the concept of grieving, I mean, you are sad and you are grieving, but the actual like doing any grief work or doing anything just doesn't even resonate with you, because you're just about survival. But when that fog begins to lift and you go, oh crap, this is for real, I say that's almost the go button. Like, I got to do this. I got to grieve. It's permission to start. Maybe you begin reading some books. You begin looking at other parents. You begin going to a support group. You begin saying, well, what about that? How did they survive it? So it's like a go button. Like, I need to do this. But then over a period of time, what happens while we're in that go season is we have these, times where we have to say goodbye to something that we used to do with that person, or they're not going to do that anymore. Today's sponsor, in her notes, Jean said, the memories are great, but the reminders are so painful. It's those reminders that say you're not going to come in the door and kick your boots anymore. She shared that in her story about her son. I know one woman they were potato farmers, and they had planted in the spring, and her husband died during the season. So when she went to harvest them, other than the big equipment harvesting them, she asked if she could just dig up a few potatoes. She went out there in the dirt and just dug them up and said, Jim, I'm not going to do this with you in this life anymore, and just had memories about all the hard work that they did, and just grieved those times. Those are those goodbyes. Those are those bites that when it overwhelms us and we're faced with something and we do that, we are adjusting. We are trying to figure this out, but first we have to grieve it, right? So those are the goodbyes. But over a period of time, and from the go button to what I'm going to call the stop button, and I'll explain what I mean by stop. We don't stop remembering them or loving them. That's not what I'm talking about. But that time frame can vary for everybody. But what I mean by the stop button is maybe when you give yourself permission to stop going to support group, like it was there for a season. Some people I know, a friend of mine led a support group. And then realized that after several years of leading that she was done leading that support group for bereaved moms. That's okay. That you begin saying, I've done those things. I can do something different. I don't have to actively grieve anymore, is what I mean by stop. That I'm not in the depths of it. I'm always going to grieve. I'm always going to have that well of sorrow inside of me. I had one mom say that well of sorrow is always inside of her, but she doesn't jump in it as often. She is not overwhelmed and drowning in it, but she can get in touch with it just like that, right? Like it's there. But that permission to stop actively grieve and look at more relief and renewal and redirection and reinvesting and all those things. It's easier to do that when we've had the go button, it's easier to come to this stop because we've given ourselves permission to say goodbye when the pain wasn't so intense. We do it slowly and gradually over time. One of my favorite stories about this is that moving out into life again is a mixture of these things, right? Like it's a mixture of joy and sorrow. It's a mixture of, hellos and goodbyes. It's a mixture of, I don't have to do that anymore. Grief is the highest tribute to love, but it's prolonged after a unreasonable point. It become a monument of self-pity or more about us than it is. So what I want to talk about when I said my example is a woman whose husband died, and I got to her house after the death and we talked about their life and how they met and who he was. And I then we talked about the death and what happened and what she misses about it. But then I asked her the question that I asked most people on the first session with them. It was, there anything about your grief that you're wondering if it's normal, that you just hoping we got to today or that we could touch on? And she said, oh yeah. She said, I have to ask you. She said, when I first married my husband, we decided we were going to have good family dinners on Sunday after church. And she said, but he loved Brussels sprouts. So he asked me to make Brussels sprouts every Sunday. She said, I don't eat them. But every Sunday for 50-some years, she cooked Brussels sprouts. And I'm like, okay. So she lovingly did that. What happened was when her husband died, she said to me, I'm still cooking Brussels sprouts on Sunday. And I said, that's so normal, because you don't just say goodbye to that right away. You don't just stop doing that. She was lovingly still giving to that relationship. And I said, I'm not worried about that. That seems very normal to me. She said, okay. So when I saw her about 6-8 months after he died, I said, how's it going with the Brussels sprouts? She said, she said, you know what? I buy them. And then Sunday comes and I think, why cook them? Because you're just going to throw them out. So she said, I buy them. I bring them home. And on Sundays, I throw them out. And I said, okay. And then about, it was probably 16, 18 months after he died, I said, what about the Brussels sprouts? She said, oh, honey, I don't have to buy those anymore. She said, I always look at them in the store and I feel them and I look at the price and I talk to him about, boy, they're not very good selection this week or whatever it is. But she said, I don't have to buy them anymore. But see, she didn't just stop on the first Sunday after he died of something she lovingly did for 50 years. She did it over a period of time when the pain wasn't so intense. We do that a lot with a lot of relationships. We don't realize that we have people that we are very connected to, maybe neighbors or someone, and they moved and you'd write to them, you'd call them. Now we have, Snapchat and FaceTime and all that stuff. But over a period of time, you go, wow, I haven't really talked to them in a long time. Or we haven't even gotten a Christmas card from them. Because you didn't unplug the moment they moved. You did it slowly and gradually over a period of time. But you always love them. You never have to say goodbye. When I talk about goodbyes, we're not talking about the hope that you will see them again in the future. If that's your belief in your belief system, you never have to say goodbye to love and the history and who they were and what they taught you. But what we're talking about is saying goodbye to the relationship as it existed. So people who grieve early, and as the rule of thumb in grief is the sooner and more intensely you grieve, the sooner you heal. They don't stay in that space from the go to the stop button as long as maybe others, because they're doing it when the pain is there and they feel it, rather than years of poorly managed grief. My job is sad. There's no doubt. Who I meet on a daily basis are in the depths of pain. But what is more sad for me, because I have realized two things: that death is a part of life. There's no other way out. And that each moment is so precious that it should be lived to the fullest. Those are the two things that I have learned. But what I've also learned is that death is sad and it is devastating. As I've mentioned in all the previous ones, it is life-altering. It changes you forever. But what's more sad to me is when someone stops living, when someone they loved has died. I've watched that, where their life is over. And they even say it sometimes. Like, I know at the beginning we feel that, But I'm talking 3, 5, 8, 10 years out. If you're still like your life has no value, no purpose, no meaning, and you've pretty much stopped living, that's really sad. That's harder for me than the death itself. Um, Now, the thing about grief is it's not a steady climb. Like if you were to chart grief, you're going to have dips and valleys. And I've said this before, but regressions happen at anniversaries, holidays, those kinds of things, reminders. They would have graduated from high school. Watching their friends get married and have children and do those. All those things are going to cause regressions. But they say if you were to chart it, when we go down, we don't go down as far as we were before. And when we come up, we're in a little different space. So having that hurt and pain and acknowledging it, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. And it doesn't mean you're going to have to stay there as long as you did at the beginning, but we have to touch it. But then when we come up, and where are we now? So when I talk about reestablishing our life, and I mentioned last week we were talking about children, that I was going to expand a little bit more on this, is that if you envision a triangle and each side, one is you and one is the person we're in a relationship with, and then the bottom is the base in which we build our life. So you can build your life on, I kind of use my mother-in-law as this example. They used to go to the casino. They'd take car rides. She loved to read. They'd play cards with friends. In their early days, they would bowl. They did a lot of different things, a lot of travel. So if he had a bad day and it trickles down, they'd say, well, let's call so-and-so and play some cards, or let's take a drive, or let's go to the casino and spend our little, allotted funds and then drive home. And so with either one of them, if anything bad had happened, it trickled down and you have this base in which you cope. So life stresses, that's how we handle them. But when death occurs or a divorce, our triangle's turned upside down and you're teetering on the point. Okay. And anything that happens is just sending, like, you're not established. The things that you used to count on and knew that you could do, you can't do. So you're teetering on a point. And it's like, how do I climb up that? That structure is like, I'm going to fall off the side. Now, here's the thing. For children, remember when I said, they said, who's going to drive me to school? Who's going to teach me how to fish if grandpa dies? And it was going to teach them how to fish. What they're saying is, I need to know that I have some stability in life, that someone is going to provide for me what I need them to provide, because as children, they look to the adults in their life to provide that stability. So we want, with children, to help them turn that around quickly, to say, some things you're going to say, I don't know the answer right now, and we'll figure that out. But other things be like, Uncle Steve can teach you how to fish, and we can do this, and we're going to make sure you get to school. But for adults, it takes a long time to turn that triangle upside down, or right side up. It takes a long time. It's not something we do quickly, or anyone can say, oh, I'll come in and we'll do this and we'll do that and everything will be okay. So the means by which I think the triangle is turned right side up is by CPR. And this is not cardiopulmonary resuscitation, because if it was, you could rely on someone else to administer it to you. But the type of CPR that I'm talking about is the type where you have to do it yourself. You have to give this to yourself. And remember, this is a technique that's in the long range. The C is communication. Especially I find in the spousal relationship, the person who died may be the person that you communicated the most with, or were the most connected to in that sense. But in any relationship, we do need to begin to communicate with others. We need to tell someone who we really are. We need to be invested in relationships and communicate. And I'm going to give an example of what I mean by that in a moment. So that's the C, the communication. The P is participation. Remember I mentioned withdrawal and isolating. That's frequently a response to grief in the early on. But we need to begin gradually going places and doing things and participating in life. But what I want to tell you is, when you're reestablishing yourself and your family, Sometimes it's those same favorite activities that you used to do, but oftentimes we have to add something new. So I mentioned my mother in law. When she was reestablishing herself, there are certain things that she has never really done without her husband. And one of those is go to the casino. She just doesn't have a desire. It's not the same. They had a rhythm, they had their technique, they knew how much money they were willing to lose. It was what they did together. And so without him, not really going to happen. Reading, when he first died, she couldn't read. And now she's back to all the reading that she loves to do. But the other thing is in that self identity, who am I now? She's rediscovered other things. She has found a group of lady play cards with. She does. There was a period of time where her and a lady friend would go and take a long car ride and just talk about life. But the other thing is that she tried, oh, let's do some crafting. Let's go to a quilt show. Let's go do this. She really loves collecting cookbooks and looking at recipes and trying something new. And so for your family, maybe that's why you change some traditions, because doing the same tradition, when you reestablish yourself, it's not the same. So when you re-anchor yourself and you participate in life, you say, well, from now on, instead of having our traditional Christmas, we're going to go to a water park. We're going to travel. We're going to do this or that. And that is okay, to try something new. And the thing I say about the holidays is anything you try or any activity, if you don't like it, you never have to do it again, right? So if it doesn't work for you, that's okay, but you can try it. So the C is communication, the P is participation, and the R is relationship. Enlarging your circle of close friends is an absolute must. And I find most bereaved people feel more connected to other bereaved people if they're in a support group, they're in a community, you feel a connection with other people who are walking that road. But we need to be in relationships. And sometimes for older people, this can be harder. When I meet a lot of, people who are bereaved well into my mother included, well into their, 70s, 80s, 90s, it can be more difficult to be in relationships. But I also say, don't let this relationships be limited to people your own age. So if you are an older person, spend time with young kids. If you're younger, spend time with some older people. So I said I'd give an example. My husband and I moved to a very rural part of Michigan, just kind of way out there. Many people know that Michigan can be used as a hand to state where it is. And we were way up here living, not on the Traverse City side, let's just say on the other side of Michigan. And he worked a lot, and I was lonely and bored. And so since I love the beach and I grew up on Lake Michigan, I would go over to Lake Huron and I'd go to the beach and I try to look for a friend who, I was 23 at the time, that was about my age, that maybe looked like me, could be a good friend. And one day I hit the jackpot. Okay. And I communicated with this girl. We walked up and down the beach. This was in the 80s. We didn't have cell phones. We actually got in the car and went and had lunch together. We had such a great time. So when we were leaving, I said, well, maybe we can meet here again, or we can exchange phone numbers. And she said, oh, I'm not from here. I'm from Rhode Island. And I was like, I spent all day communicating, participating, and relating to you, and you don't even live here? I was so discouraged. So I went to the pastor of the church that I was attending at the time, or we were attending, and I told him, I said, I'm so lonely. And I went to the beach and I told him the story, and he said, Gwen, you know what you need? You need a jewel. And I'm like, I need a jewel. And so he shared with me Proverbs 31 about women and wise women and their value, and they're rare and valuable. And he said, you need a jewel in your life. What about connecting with one of the older ladies in the church and get to know them? And what I learned about participating and communicating with others is that if your motive is to get to know someone else better, your needs are simultaneously met. And so I did. I started with having a jewel in my life. And I've had a lot of older people who have spoken into me. My jewels, one of them, she was on the front cover of a huge newspaper here in Michigan for having the best bread and butter pickles. I've learned how, to do things, and parenting and questions and just spending time with wiser older people has really been a value in my life. And now I'm at the age where I can be somebody else's jewel, where I can speak into younger moms and people and invest in others. And so maybe you could look at that to say, who could I have speak into me and who can I speak into, so that we're communicating, participating, and relating, and you're getting the CPR that you need to be alive and to reestablish yourself. And yes, I used to have, my life was like this, but now this is what it looks like. Um, when I just had this thought, yeah, I guess you guys probably notice I look around because my thoughts go, and I like, what story can I share? Do I share that one? How much time do I have? That's a little bit about why my brain goes. But one of the thoughts that I just had as I looked over is, man, this is what Mercy's done, right? The CPR, like some of you just listening to these other moms and their stories has been so life-giving to you, because you are communicating, you're hearing their story, the participating. Many people have gotten connected in support groups because Mercy's talked so much about the value of that. And the Starlight group she leads for bereaved moms, you can attend virtually. And then that leads to that relationships where you've developed relationships, and she's developed so many relationships. This has been the CPR for her, and for many of you. So I just, that thought came to my mind and I wanted to share that. One other thing is, if you think about a triangle, and if you look at life, that most of what people see is about 10%, about 90% is below the surface. So if someone sees only 10% of this structure, it's pretty, stable. So, but if we're upside down and they see 10%, it's even more stable. It's like long. So draw an upside down triangle and draw the line and see the part that people see. That's why they say, oh, you're doing so well. Oh, I'm so proud of you. You're so strong. But what they don't see is that 90% that you're teetering on a point, that you're really trying to figure out how to survive. So they don't always see that. And so that's why people say those things that, you're doing so well, which just always makes me chuckle. The next part about our long range goals is kind of like, if you think of a wheel and how a wheel has to be balanced, it has to have the air it needs to go around and around. We have dimensions too that have to be filled for us to go around without clunking and to be healthy. And I'm going to divide them up. So take a circle and draw two lines, one top to bottom and one side to side. So give you 4 compartments to your circle. And the first one is physical, that we really do have to take care of ourselves physically. And I mentioned trauma on the first day, is that trauma demands more convalescence, that we take care of ourselves, and that we need that in acute grief. If you've been a long-term caregiver, even if you haven't, anytime you have a loss, I would say to have an examination, just a routine physical with your doctor, and let them know what you've been through. It does us good to know that we're physically fit. If you've been a long-term caregiver, I find many times they've ignored things that need to be looked at in themselves, and to take care of ourselves physically. The other part of that is adequate rest, moving your body, get some sleep. These are components you can look at a whole lot closer of things that you really can change, right? Like having good sleep patterns. There's so much available online, and there's sound machines, and there's mindfulness that helps you go to sleep. There's just so many good things. So sleep is important, but exercise, diet, all those things. And I mentioned the very first day about the word resolve in grief and how we feel so tense. And I said, we're going to loosen and relax. And some of you may be actually aware of how listening to some of these educational tools has allowed you to relax a little bit and know that you're normal and given you some things to work on. But the other piece about the tension of grief is sometimes we simply need some relaxation, like breathing, mindfulness, just being aware and breathing. I could contain grief in my body because I listen to it all the time. I'm a heavy sigher. I breathe a lot because I have to let that go. I cannot keep everybody's grief and pain in my body, because physically that would not be good for me. So I do a lot of sighing, breathing in, and I breathe in, the good and what I've learned from that person. I exhale all the things that I can't control, all the uncertainties, all that pain, that I do not have to carry that. So I practice that, and you can too. So wonderful things out there. Maybe that'll be something that we've explored before and we can explore again. You can look up episodes on self-care and how we do that. But physically, you need to take care of yourself. Now, mentally, I think at the beginning of our grief that mentally we cannot watch violence. We have to watch out what we're reading and taking in, um, you know, avoid just a lot of things that you already know you just can't deal with when you're grieving. You go, I can't watch that. I can't, maybe the news, whatever it is. But the other part about mentally is, what are the mental tapes you're listening to? Are they, we've talked about some of them. I must have done something to deserve this. It's all my fault. I'm never going to get over this. Life will never be the same. I'll never be happy again. And we begin to play these mental tapes over and over again, and they become very self-defeating. And I believe in the power of a positive attitude. Now, I'm not just saying, oh, choose joy and just be happy. But what are you saying to yourself? I reading a book on brain development and how to have a healthy brain as we age, because I'm getting older. And he talks about, it's just for reference, it's called Change Your Brain Every Day by Dr. Amen, Amen. And he talks about ants and how ants just come in, and how if you've ever had ants in your house and there's just so many of them and they're just consistent in the line. And he calls ants automated negative thoughts. Some of you have a lot of ants in your head, just these automated negative thoughts. And we need an anteater. We need something that's going to take that away. And I've met a lot of people who have had some really, really good positive mental tapes that they played to themselves. And maybe some of you don't realize that you've already done this, that you have said to yourself, I don't know how, but I will survive. I can do hard things. I will trust even though I don't understand. I will put one foot in front of the other. I will continue to live life for my surviving children or my spouse or I will be obedient to what God has called me to do, whatever it is. You've already maybe done some of those positive mental tapes in your head. I think I have many examples that I share in my video series, but I think I'll just quickly share of a family that I met. And again, have their permission. The wife called me up and she said, my husband and I are doing horrible. She said, our daughter died 9 years ago and we're horrible. And I'm like, all right, well, come into my office and we'll get together, which is at a funeral home. So when they got there, she said, see, my husband is doing so horrible. He stayed out in the car. He can't even come into the funeral home. It's just too hard, too much of a reminder. So again, not a lot of adjustment to be able to move about in their life. So I knew there was something, but I did what I normally do. And I listened to their daughter's life and who she was. And I did recall that I had met them. And I'm like, she was your only child. She died in a car accident in college over Thanksgiving break. And she said, yes, you remember? And I said, well, you came to support group a couple times. She said, yes, we did. And I said, okay. So then, we talked about her daughter's death. And then I said, what have you done with the grief? And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, it's been 9 years. What do you do with that every day? And she said, well, you remember we came to support group? I said, yeah, a couple times. So what do you do with it? So then she was kind of confused and I got more specific. I said, okay, what are your days like? She said, well, we do the same thing every day. I said, okay, tell me what that is. She said, we get up every day and we go into her room and we tell her how horrible a day it's going to be without her and how much we miss her and that we long for her, and we cry, and then we go out and we live our day, and then every day we go in and say goodnight to her and tell her what a horrible day it was without her. Are you recognizing a theme here? Horrible, horrible, horrible. So I got this handout that I give, and it's part of my video series. And it's the power of positive thinking and just sentences that are related to grief. And some may be simply, I will survive this, or my love for them didn't change, but the relationship did. Or I can't even remember right now. I'm running a blank on how, there's just many of them. So I said to her, I said, you know what I think? And I got that handout and I got 2 dry erase markers. And I said, come with me. And we went out to the car and I had her husband roll down the window. And I told him, I said, I was just talking to your wife about what you do every day. I said, for 3 weeks, don't go into her room and don't say the word horrible. Live your life. I'm not saying don't miss her, don't talk about her, but just don't go into her room at the beginning or the end of your day and declare a horrible day. And I want you each to take your dry erase marker, pick a saying on this power of positive thinking that speaks to your heart, write it on your mirror and say it 3 times a day, every day. And I said, and I'll call you in 3 weeks and we'll get together. And when I called them, they said, we are doing so much better. You see, I believe in the power of positive thinking that we need to say and speak to ourselves in a life-giving way, a life-affirming way, rather than one that's defeating our life's goals and keeping us down and keeping us in a place where we are not living. So I could talk about the power of positive thinking forever, but I need to move on. So mentally, how are you taking care of yourself? Then the next one is social. Mixing among people. For my widowed people, I tell them not to let the thought that single people are in the way, to keep them from mixing with a variety of people. Maybe your family doesn't have ice skating anymore or the soccer club. What are some other things you can be involved in and begin connecting in a social way? Because we're not meant to do this alone. And we've said that several times. You'll notice it's been a theme for the weeks that we've been talking. Then lastly, so we have physical, mental, social, and then spiritual. Last week I addressed, but it's natural to have a loss of faith. Studies show that people who have a life integrated faith, not just something they do a couple times a year on a holiday or a ritual, but something that's integrated into their daily life, have an easier time dealing with loss. Now, it's not easy, but they have an easier time than those who don't have the cohesiveness of a faith or a belief system that says, even though this happens, I will trust, or I believe, or this is where I, put my hope. They have an easier time than those who don't have that. But regardless, I'm going to ask you to not neglect your soul. We are mind, body, and soul. And just as you look to feed your mind good things and feed your body good things by taking care of it and sleeping right, don't neglect your soul. So do what you have to do. If your soul is starving right now, be sure to feed it. I mentioned the tension and the true need to relax and help our body unwind from the tension that grief does. But I'm going to just take it a little step further, is looking at our coping ranges. So we all have this range in which we cope. And if we go way over here, it's more like depression, and over here is hysterical. Now, there's people who do have a bend towards depression or hysterics. And then we know there are people who may have a diagnosis that they may have, some manic episodes where they swing very quickly from one to the other. But most of us try to live our lives not too close to hysterics and not too close to depression. Now, there are things that shrink our coping ranges, and you don't have to memorize these. I'm going to read them fairly quickly. They're going to be self-explanatory. I think you're going to get the gist. But things that broaden or shrink our coping ranges are change, marital strife, deadlines, boredom, smoking, drugs, alcohol, poor diet, under rest, overwork, pressure to achieve, materialism, unemployment, violence, envy, fear, anger, guilt, discouragement, resentment. And you have all of that, and you don't have much movement. So some of you are feeling so tense because any moment you feel like you could just fall into a deep depression, or you're going to completely go hysterical. So if you notice, grief and its accompanying reactions, things that come with grief, they accompany it, they come along with, are reasons for poor coping. that it's natural. And we talked about fear, anger, discouragement, jealousy, resentment. So that's why you feel so much tension. So what I want to give you next is what we know broadens the range in which people cope. Gratitude, affection, joy, forgiveness, courage, hope, peace, a trust in God or something greater than yourself, exercise, relaxation, balanced diet, good health habits. So are you getting the gist here? That everything that we've talked about, that if you want to cope in the long haul, you must maintain yourself physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And some of these things you can control, some of you can't. But in this, how am I going to survive this in the long haul? Ask yourself, who have I shown kindness to? What can I be grateful for in the midst of all this pain? Maybe there's a friend who has just gotten it right and who has been there for you. Take that friend to lunch. Say, thank you. You got it right. Here's the things you did that I really found helpful. Go and do that. Maybe take another friend who hasn't been helpful and teach them about the other friend and say, could you go and try some of those things? But showing gratitude, kindness, a smile for someone helps. Talk encourage and hope. Talk it. Uh, go to quiet places. Now, I don't necessarily think, we talked about just a few minutes ago about participation in relationships and communication, participation in relationships, and I believe in those. But sometimes what helps us cope is just go to the beach. Some of you, it's a garden. Some of you, it's a music studio. Some of you, it's an art where you can just draw and paint. Some of you, it's a gym. It's Pilates. It's an exercise bike. But you're just going to a place where your mind can just, but to me, water and the beach, I grew up on Lake Michigan. That is my comfort and safe spot. Other people, it's other places, but go to those places where you can just talk courage and hope, let the peace that surpasses all understanding live and breathe inside of you, and you can handle stress better, right? Then you have broadened the range in which you cope. Talking courage and hope, forgiving someone. I was just going to share about broadening your coping ranges. Hopefully it'll come back to me. Forgiving someone also is like, who can I forgive, and going to those places. But we all need to find our way that helps broaden the range in which you cope. So think about what you can do to expand that. And if I think of the example, I'll share it. A few other things that I want to give you is that we tend to get overwhelmed, and the beginning of grief, there's so much stimuli and sorting everything through, and life just seems so overwhelming. One of the tools that I found that help people in the long haul is using your brain as a filter and realizing that if you think of a funnel and something, I can't really make a funnel here, but a funnel, that it starts out big and that there's just a small area for things to come through, is we have to figure out what's important to us, what's going to make it to the bottom. And that is our way of life, right? Like if your way of life, it's always overflowing, everything's all crammed, or if you have a nice even flow, you have a way of life that allows you to have some even flow. So how that happens is by what all this stuff coming in, what category you put them in. And I'll tell you what, I think death teaches us naturally that there's so many things that we don't have to worry about anymore. We can totally disregard. It's an occupational hazard, but I filter everything through death. That's the worst. So where does this fall? And if it's not important, I can disregard that. Do I really have to worry about this? And so I filter that. Then, so disregard is a category. There's just some things like we don't have to worry about. remember I said one of my gifts to bereaved people would be I just totally disregard the need for you guys to write thank you notes to people. Wouldn't that be great? Just disregard that. Then there's the unimportant category that some things just aren't important right now. Then this is my favorite category. It's called can wait. And when I get overwhelmed, I tell myself, what can wait, right? And I tell people this. I talk to my mom daily. She's 89 and been widowed for 4 years, and she's blind, and so I check in with her every day. And she'll want to ask me about something coming up. Oh, you have a big speech on Friday, or you've got this, and I'll say, Mom, that can wait. I'm not thinking about it today, because if I thought about it today, like I have the days where I can worry about that, or that's the day it's on my schedule. And if it's not, don't bring it into today. So I use the can wait. Like I schedule when I can worry about things. And then lastly, we have vital things that we have to do. And then top priority. These are things that have to get done. But slow down the pace in which you live your life. And most people don't go back. Like death teaches us that. It gives us that value that just says, you know what, I don't have to worry about that. And so your way of life can be more manageable. It can have more meaning because you have sorted it through that and slowed down the pace in which you live your life. I do remember what I was going to say when I was talking about broadening your coping ranges, and it was an example of how I talk to myself and going to places, and it filters back to that positive self-talk. um, One of the things that winds me up that I get worried about is driving in bad weather. So when I realized, when I had children and I was in charge of them, and I'm driving the family van and I've got 3 lives buckled in behind me, when the roads were bad, I wouldn't talk to them in fear because I didn't want them to be worried. I would talk to them in confidence, and I'd say, we have good tires, we're fine, we have good insurance. If we go in the ditch, we'll find out who lives there. Maybe we'd get a tow truck drive, and we'd get in a big shiny tow truck. I just gave them that confidence. But when Gwen is alone, she goes, oh, dear God, help me, help me, help me, help me. And I get so full of fear. So what I've tried to do when I talked about like broadening the range in which I cope is a fear is a liar. And I have to talk to it to say, you are fine. And now I talk to myself in a way that's kind of more gentle, and I talk those encouraging things to myself, like, you have really good tires, you're okay, um, we can call for help, you're going to be fine. And so I do that. So I don't know, that was the example that had come to my mind in all of that. um, I think in closing, I often think about, what do I want to leave you with? And if I were to do a synopsis of the things that I do in my job, is I normalize reactions, that you are very normal, and the things you are feeling. I mean, sometimes what I can say to people is, nothing you've said today has made me think, oh, this person's not going to do well. It doesn't really happen. They're so normal in what they're experiencing. And I want to give you that. I also want to give you the courage to do the work that grief requires, to look at it, to say, this hurts. I said, grief waits on a welcome, to say the necessary hellos and goodbyes and have the courage to do that. Don't have to do it all at once. We do it over a period of time. But then when that time has passed, give yourself the gift of healing, to say, I'm not in the same spot. I am better. I do feel better. I am enjoying life differently. Yes, I will always love and never forget that person. But give yourself the gift of healing. You're worth it. Your family's worth it. And we're here for just a little while. So I consider it a privilege to the people who have taught me that I could turn around and teach you. I consider it a privilege to anybody, however many that is, who have watched from beginning to end to hear. It has given my life a value that it's just priceless. So I can honestly say I love my job. and I love walking beside you. So if there's anything that I can do to give you resources, ideas, you need someone to talk to, I've brought this up. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but maybe a person is only watching this episode and hasn't watched the three previous ones, that through my website, which we don't want you to purchase on that, because Marcy and I are extending a coupon for the next few months of those who have listened to these episodes to have a discount if you want to watch these videos in more extensive way and get all the handouts that are available and the added reading and work. I just thought of something that I do also want to say, is that if you are still worried that you are not normal, or that you're struggling with something that you can say, wow, Gwen hit on something and I know, reach out for help. Like, talk to somebody, and it doesn't have to be me. So I want to encourage you to invest in yourself in that way. But so back to the coupon. So if you want to meet with me, I have that available. There's details that I would give you about what that looks like, the 3 checkpoints. The first one is the wound, what happened to me. The second one is the work that grief requires. And the third one is the wonder. Whatever you're wondering, I wonder how I'm going to survive. I wonder what my family is going to look like now. I wonder why, just whatever you're wondering. Then I also just want to say, for those of you who are at the point that you are beginning to help others, and I've helped several of you do this, and this is the coolest part about this, is that so many of you, part of your story now, who you are now, is you're helping other bereaved people, that you are out there just saying, let me help you, let me walk beside you. This is what it was like for me. And so if you need resources with that, I have a weekly support group, so you don't have to come up with things for yourself that you can buy. I have a grief mentor training. It was filmed in a church, and it's rather faith-based, but it has a 38-page workbook to help you dig into how can I really help others. So I just want to be a resource to you, and know that those things are available. Again, thank you, Marcy, for what you do and how you provide CPR to all of us, and that you were able to do that for yourself this month, and that I'm able to come in and be in this precious space. I consider it a real privilege. Thank you.